Hey folks, Real Honesty with John Ritlin. I'm John Ritlin, and this is the final part of my top 20 worst WCW rivalries. It's been a 6-part series, 3 on the best, now 3 on the worst. Me basically talking briefly about my favorite, least favorite rivalries, and later next year, and I talked about this in my final best show that I did, where I'll be doing specific feuds on a certain show. Like I'll take, like, say, the Dusty Flair rivalry and I'll go in depth for like about 10 to 15 minutes. Or I'll take the Flair Vader rivalry and I'll go in depth for a number of minutes. And I'll just do that, and that way it can be a way. And I'll do modern ones too. Like I'll talk Cena Orton, I'll talk Sasha Charlotte, I'll talk various ones that, feuds that I've enjoyed or didn't enjoy. And I'll use ones that people suggest, and I'll even shout them out. But these are mainly going to be the feuds that I pick. But without further ado, here is the final 6. Easier instead of doing that, 6. I don't have 6 fingers on my right hand, and no one's looking for me. It's actually at my left hand. But anyway, top 6 worst WCW rivalries. Number 6, Nash versus the Cruiserweights, because it led to the unmasking of Ray, and it led to the squashing of everybody. I mean, yes, there were some fluke wins here and there, or some, it's like in some weird stuff, but it just didn't serve any purpose. It didn't serve any purpose except to squash a lot of them. They did a lot. TNA did a lot better with Nash in the X division in later, like, '06, I think '05, '06 especially. But there just wasn't a lot of creative, like, juice behind it in WCW, and they really botched the whole thing, which is a shame given how Nash seemed like he wanted to give back and help the Cruiserweights, but, well, creative didn't want to do that. And yes, Nash was the booker, but still, there were people in charge that were telling Nash, no, you gotta do this and this. So yeah, the whole feud was just ridiculous. And number 5, Kevin Green and Steve Mongo McMichael. It was 2 former football players, one, Kevin Green, who took it seriously, and Steve Mongo McMichael, who didn't seem to take it seriously at all. Or if he took it seriously, he just wasn't any good, because how could somebody who's such a good football player be such a lousy wrestler? My God, Steve McMichael was horrible. How he was U.S. champion at any point, I will never understand. Now, I'm not saying that Kevin Green was like, Ricky Steamboat or anybody, but at least Green took it seriously and seemed to understand his role and how he should carry himself in the ring and listened and worked hard and everything. And Kevin Green was part of an awful lot more matches than I would have thought. And he was able to do this despite the fact that he was an active football player. I've never quite understood how they were able to pull that off at that time. But wrestling was at a bigger boom period, at least, I guess, across the board, instead of just in WWE, than it is now. But yeah, that feud was just bad. It was 2 former football players, and it would have been one thing if they played against each other, but my understanding is they never did. I mean, McMichael had been, retired for years, and I guess it was just a football thing. It was bad. It was just horrible. Number 4, Glacier versus Mortis and Wrath. It was basically Mortal Kombat in the ring, without the violence and without the interesting characters. Because Glacier, while a good worker, was Sub-Zero, and Mortis was essentially Reptile, that was Canyon, and Wrath was Shao Kahn, or it wasn't Goro because he didn't have enough arms, but it was bad. It was just really, really bad. And then you had James, the later James Mitchell. I forget what they called him. I forget what they called him in WCW. His run there was so forgettable. It's really sad because he's such a great talker. But yeah, the feud was terrible. And then they include Ernest the Cat Miller, in a couple matches. So that right there will get the feud on almost anything, because Ernest Miller was a horrible, horrible worker. I don't know if he's a horrible person, he's just a horrible worker. But yeah, the whole thing with trying to do Mortal Kombat in the ring, really, really bad. I mean, just really bad. So, New Blood versus Millionaires Club, because you didn't know who was on what side. You didn't care who was on what side. You didn't. And it didn't matter what creative minds were behind it, because you could have the best creative minds behind it. You could have the best or worst creative minds behind it. If you don't have people above them that can say, that actually want to go with the vision of the company succeeding, then it doesn't matter. It didn't matter if it was Russo and Bischoff. It didn't matter if it was Russo and Ferrara. It didn't matter if it was Bischoff and Hogan and Nash running the company. It didn't matter who was running the company, basically, is my point. You could take people that got all their ideas in their head that want to present them, but if you don't have somebody, up in Titan Towers or AOL Time Warner Towers, I guess at this point, since they were doing the merger, if they don't want the company to succeed, it doesn't matter who's in charge. And the New Blood Millionaires Club feud proved that because no one cared. It started out initially okay because you had everybody, okay, hey, you got some people part of the New Blood. Why Shane Douglas was part of the New Blood, I don't know. And why Buff Bagwell was part of the New Blood, I don't know. Considering he'd been in the company for 9 years. But I guess since he was a younger guy still, I think he was only 30 at the time, it sort of made sense. But yeah, the whole thing, especially from just top on down, but especially AOL Time Warner just not wanting the company to succeed, doomed this feud from the start. And also WCW 2000, it was just sad because everything was just being thrown to the wall because the company was unsalvageable no matter who was in charge. Because of that merger, it was just ridiculous. I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but that feud, it had such potential and it got botched. Don't get me wrong, WWE's done way worse. But they were more in a position to do stuff worse. WCW at that point, sadly, was spiraling out of control. And I wish WCW was still around to this day. I wish it was because it was such a great company. And such a great alternative for WWE. Hogan versus the Dungeon of Doom is number 2. It was bad. I mean, what in the world? I mean, that wasn't a glitch in the video, by the way. That was my brain glitching, like thinking, what else am I going to say? Hogan just couldn't do anything at that point, and he was feuding with guys he had feuded with before. There was Kamala in there. There was a Shark who was John Tenta. And then him and Kevin, Hogan and Kevin Sullivan, which I'm sorry, Sullivan was not a good worker. He just wasn't. I mean, there are people that like him, and that's fine, that's great. I'm not telling you that you're wrong. But Sullivan was just not a good worker at all. And then you had the Yeti come out, and I don't know what he did with the Giant, but it looked like they were trying to DP him. And not TP him, DP him. And I don't know why he was a mummy. But yeah, the whole Dungeon of Doom thing was ridiculous. And then you had the Alliance and Hulkamania, so you had Hogan and Savage, one of my favorite superstars of all time, squash all these guys. They were in the Dungeon of Doom, including Z Gangster, who was Zeus in the No Holds Barred movie. And there were a couple other people. There was the Final Solution, or the Ultimate Solution. There were others also, like people that were just brought in. But yeah, it was absolutely horrible. And it was a 3-tiered cage match. It was uncensored 96, I think, and just no one cared. That feud dragged on forever. And then, unfortunately, Brutus Beefcake was part of it, and that made it even worse. It was just not a good feud at all. And number 1, Ric Flair versus David Flair. David Flair should have never been in the wrestling business. And if he was, he should have not been allowed to get near the wrestling business until he got better. WCW thrust him into the ring too soon. That being said, David, I don't even think with the proper training would have been any good. I don't know if his heart was in it. But yeah, David was like crazy, or David was like, a face and a heel, and he was teen with his dad, and he wasn't. Then he went the psycho killer route, just without the wrestling ability or the charisma to do it, even though he sort of fit with having the crazy eyes about him. There just wasn't anything to it. I mean, it's like from 99 on to whenever David Flair was gone, it's like it just wasn't any good. David Flair was an unsalvageable project. And David versus his dad just was a terrible, terrible feud. So that's where I got to leave this off. Do you agree? Do you disagree with what I said on my best list and my worst list? Like, share, comment, and subscribe. My Twitter link is in the description. It's been Real Honesty with John Ritlin. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.